the surveillance parties. In the classroom, all eyes were on Racso. Q, R, S, T, U, V, he recited. W, X, Y, Z. That's wonderful. You've learned a lot in just 3 weeks, Racso. Hermione smiled. Today, Racso was paired with Amos, who was also learning to write and recite the alphabet. Timothy and Sally were putting the finishing touches on a map of the territory around the nest. After 3 weeks, Timothy still wore a soft bandage around his side, but the wound it covered had become a long pink scar. We're finished! Sally waved the large square of birch bark paper in the air. Come and look at what we've done. The other rats gathered around. Racso stood near the front of the group because he was so short. The map was painted in vivid colors: blue for the water, green for the meadows and gardens, browns and grays for the woods and mountains. I can see the emerald pond. There's the playground. And here are the entrances to the nest: the front door, the back door, and the emergency door. Sally nodded. She pointed to a wavy blue line. Here's where the creek flows out of the Trout River and winds around until it gets to the dam at the pond. And here's the swimming hole. And here's the spot where we catch crayfish. You can tell because there's a bend toward the south right there. Racso winced when Sally said the word river. How could she seem so cheerful when they were all in danger? The phrase underwater by Christmas echoed in his mind. Yet the discussions in the classroom had been calm and rational, except for Racso. But I can't swim, he would shout. What am I going to do? Who will save me? Hermione tried to be reassuring. We've faced other problems, Racso, and we've always found solutions. Just last fall, we invented a trap to catch a red-tailed hawk who had built a nest on the cliff north of here. We blindfolded her and carried her to the other side of the mountain, where we let her go, and no one got hurt. But what about the life preserver? Racso yelled. The other students laughed out loud. Maybe Timothy will save you again, Brendan suggested archly. He hadn't forgotten the time when Racso had tried to take his pen. Racso glared. Just leave Timothy out of this, he snapped. Hermione was sympathetic. She saw Racso working hard and trying to be friendly with the other rats, but the stories about his girlfriends back in the city didn't impress the others. And when he sang the hit song, Everybody jump in my little Chevrolet, all the rats clapped politely, but no one asked him to sing it again. He became so desperate to make an impression that he lied. He told the others that his family was rich and lived in the basement of a mansion with a swimming pool. Everyone just listened, except Timothy, who rolled his eyes. That made Racso even angrier. Timothy was Mr. Perfect. He never did anything wrong. Sometimes Racso felt like doing something mean to him, just for the fun of it, but he didn't dare. Timothy was his only friend. Timothy enjoyed showing Racso the valley. The rat's nest was a complicated maze that took a full day to explore. The sleeping wing, the cafeteria, the storerooms, the nursery, the meeting room, the school. On the floor below these were an infirmary and several offices, one for Elvira the doctor, one for Nicodemus, one for Hermione, one for Arthur, one for Justin. There were 3 empty rooms with soft feather pillows and slate blackboards. Thinking rooms. These could be reserved by anyone who had a problem and needed a quiet place to figure out a solution. Some interesting inventions had been conceived there. The granite solar collectors, which heated the nest during the coldest part of the winter, and the water wheel, which produced energy and also ground acorns into flour and squeezed oil from the harvest of peanuts and soybeans. But best of all was the playground. "Is it really just for us?" Racso asked Timothy when he first saw it. "The ones I've seen have always been for human kids." Timothy nodded. "Arthur helped us build it last spring. The whole class worked on it together." "I want to go on the slide," Racso yelled. "I want to swing on the grapevine." "Go ahead," Timothy said. "There's only one rule, that we take turns. Everyone gets to go once before anyone goes twice." That was hard for Racso. As he climbed the bamboo ladder to the polished wooden slide, he felt a rising excitement. Christopher had rubbed the chute with peanut oil to make it really fast. When he pushed off from the ladder, Racso felt as if he were flying. He slid down on all fours, then sitting upright, then belly up, with his tail waving. That was when Hermione reminded him of the rule. "But I don't like to take turns," he protested. "And anyway, the others had lots of turns before I ever got here. I need a chance to catch up." But Hermione insisted. So Racso waited in line impatiently, his hat jammed over his ears and his tail twitching. When his turn came, he scrambled up the ladder like a wild thing, then shrieked for joy during the fast ride down. "There's a meeting tonight," Hermione made the announcement just as school was about to be dismissed. "We'll be talking about the flooding and trying to figure out what to do." "Do the children go?" Racso asked. "Of course. We couldn't possibly make a decision as a group without having the children there." "Will we vote about what to do?" Hermione hesitated. Only if there's widespread disagreement. Usually, after a long discussion, we agree among ourselves on what seems best. But when we can't agree, we vote, and the majority rules." "Even the children vote?" She nodded. "Everyone but the very small babies. So listen carefully and think hard. You may be the one who will solve the problem." After dinner, Racso and Timothy went straight to the meeting room. It was a sea of rats. Rats sitting, standing, lying on the floor, chatting, snacking, dozing. There were older rats, babies, and all ages and sizes in between. Families, single rats, couples, children playing alone and in groups. It was the first time since the night of their arrival that Racso had seen the entire community in one place, and he was amazed. The room was so packed with rats that it looked to Racso as if not one more could fit through the door. In the front of the meeting room was a large slate blackboard, and facing the crowd sat Nicodemus, Justin, and Hermione. Hermione spoke first. "Quiet down. Get ready to think." The rats grew still. Justin stood up. "All of you know that the Trout River, which is fed by the stream and pond outside, has risen almost 3 feet in the last 2 months," he said. "We've measured the rainfall as we usually do, and we know that there hasn't been enough rain to cause this kind of flooding. The flooding is being caused by something else." Justin paused. "We have made 3 short trips to the trout in the past 2 weeks, but so far we haven't been able to find a clue to what's happening." Hermione turned to the rats for ideas. "I think we should send scouting parties in both directions along the river for a distance of 10 miles, Arthur said. "They should leave early next week and plan to be gone for 2 full weeks. When they return, we can discuss what they found and work from there." Another rat proposed that Arthur and Justin lead the surveillance parties. They agreed to do this and asked for volunteers to go with them. "Each party should have 6 or 7 rats in it," Justin said. "They should be rats who like to walk and have keen powers of observation. Many rats raised their paws to volunteer. Racso and Timothy raised their paws too. Racso was practically jumping up and down in his eagerness to be chosen. Justin scanned the room and called out names to Hermione, who wrote them on the blackboard. Brendan, Sally, John, Francis, Max, Brutus, Tom, Becky. He stopped and counted the names. I need 3 more, he said. He looked at the remaining paws. Racso waved his paw to the right and left and said, Me, me. Justin was very deliberate. Beatrice and Frank, Justin said. He hesitated, then looked hard at Timothy, whose paw was still in the air. Are you sure you're well enough? I'm sure, Timothy said. Justin looked at Elvira. I'll send an extra dose of dried broth, just in case. Oh. I'll send an extra dose of dried broth, just in case, she said. But I think he'll do fine. So Justin added Timothy's name to the list on the blackboard, and that was all. A few paws remained forlornly in the air, mostly those of children too young to be chosen. Next time, Justin said with a smile. Racso took his paw down. Timothy had been chosen to go on the expedition, but he, Racso, was to stay at home. He began to sulk. He looked in the opposite direction from Timothy with a fixed, hard stare. He hoped that Timothy would notice, but instead he heard Timothy joking and laughing with Brendan as if he didn't even care. Racso slunk through the crowd and out the door. He ran down the corridor to his room and flung himself on the bed. They would be sorry. Surely they could have used a rat of Racso's sophistication, a rat who had only recently completed a long and difficult journey. Fools! Fools! Let them find out for themselves what they had missed. Timothy, Brendan, and Christopher stood in the hallway after the meeting ended. Where's Racso? Brendan asked. He left after the scouting parties were chosen, Timothy said. I think he felt hurt that he wasn't picked. I expect Justin wanted rats who could read, Brendan said. Racso's learning fast, but he couldn't read anything on his own yet. I wish I could go, Christopher said. I didn't even bother to raise my paw. My parents won't let me. They think I'm too wild. There's always next time, Christopher nodded. Racso and I will have a good time. There'll be plenty to do right here at Thorn Valley. Plenty of trouble to get into, you mean? Brendan said, looking at Christopher. You and Racso should get along just fine. Christopher smiled. There was a gleam in his eye, but he didn't say anything at all. Explorers. The rats who had been chosen for the scouting parties met early the following Monday in the conference room. Justin and Arthur stood together with their heads bent over the map. My group will travel due south from Thorn Valley until we reach the river about midday tomorrow, Arthur explained. From there, we'll follow the riverbank till the canyon makes it impossible. If we haven't found anything by then, we'll climb the canyon wall and follow it outside the state forest into human territory. We'll head due south along the river, Justin said. I expect the terrain there to be wooded with sloping hills. That's what the crows have said. But no matter what we find, we'll plan to meet you back here at the end of 2 weeks. Arthur nodded. Good luck. Justin smiled back, but his smile was tense. The morning was bright and cold. Timothy shivered as he emerged from the tunnel. He had been assigned to Arthur's group, along with Jean, Max, Frank, and Beatrice. The rats traveled in pairs, with Arthur at the head of the column and Frank bringing up the rear. Timothy's partner was Beatrice, a graceful rat who was known for her adventurousness and for her love of dried mushrooms, which had resulted in the colonies eating mushroom soup, mushroom stew, mushroom bread, and even mushroom pancakes on the days when she worked in the kitchen. She and Timothy trotted side by side with their eyes on Arthur, who might signal them to stop or scatter and hide at any moment. The first day was easy. They followed the brook that led from Emerald Pond south toward the river. The land was mostly open, with occasional patches of brambles. Arthur checked the sky often for hawks. Before twilight, they dug a large hole to sleep in and cut branches to spread over the top for camouflage. Before they went to bed, they ate stalks of wild wheat that grew nearby. They reached the river in the early afternoon on the second day. The green water was calm and clear, but it had risen so high that its bed included tree trunks and the path that used to follow beside it. Arthur checked the gauge that had been fastened to the trunk of a huge sycamore on his last visit to the river. "Up another 6 inches," he told them quietly. He scratched his head in bewilderment. Timothy felt a shiver run down his spine. Were they moving toward danger? It was almost twilight when they heard the noise. Timothy was the first to be aware of it. He was not sure that he actually heard anything, yet he sensed that there was a sound. He stopped and listened. Again, he felt the noise. It reminded him of being in the cinder block house underground when the tractor was plowing a field close by. There was no sound, but there was a vibration in the air and in the ground that was like sound. "I feel it too," Beatrice said after he had told her. "It reminds me of the feeling of thunder in the sky before you can really hear it." "Perhaps it's about to storm," suggested Frank. "We should set up camp well back from the water," Arthur said. "I'm hungry," Max said. The idea of supper soon had everyone's attention. Max and Timothy found a persimmon tree on the sloping hillside, and when they returned to the others, they carried a knapsack stuffed full of the sweet, juicy fruit. Camp had been set up on a knoll protected by shrubbery and pines. From there, the rats watched the sun set over the rocky ridge on the opposite side of the valley. Then the moon rose, and they went to sleep. Timothy was at the river with Arthur the next morning when he heard the sound again. This time the earth itself seemed to tremble ever so slightly beneath his feet. He looked at the surface of the water and saw that it was covered with tiny ripples. He showed Arthur. "What could it be?" "Oh, what could it be?" Arthur shook his head. "I'm not sure." But he looked worried. The sides of the valley grew steeper as the rats continued south. Around midday, they roped themselves together and climbed the cliff. The canyon wall was steep, and when they reached the top, they were exhausted. They lay down on the flat rocks to rest. Suddenly, the cliff shook. A sound like thunder filled the air. The rats leaped to their feet. "What's that?" Timothy saw Arthur open his mouth to speak, but another explosion followed the first, so that the entire canyon seemed to tremble beneath them. The air was thick with dust. Frank grabbed Timothy and pulled him close as the others huddled in terror. But the blast stopped as abruptly as they had begun. Once again, the ground was solid underfoot, and the dust settled so that they could breathe. "Dynamite," Arthur explained. "It's a powder used by humans to blow holes in the earth. It is very dangerous, though not as powerful as an earthquake or a volcano. It can level a mountainside if they use enough of it." Timothy's eyes widened. Living on the farm, he had always known that humans were to be feared. Their huge machines could destroy an entire nest of chipmunks or field mice without the driver even knowing what he had done. But to blow holes in the earth, To destroy a mountainside that was home to foxes and hawks and deer mice was more than he could fathom. "What are they using it for here?" he asked. Arthur shook his head. "I don't know, but I'd be willing to bet." "Wait," Frank interrupted. "Listen." The rats pricked up their ears. The sound they heard now was high-pitched and droning, like a giant insect. Arthur's legs began to tremble. An expression of terror crossed his face. "Arthur!" They rushed to his side. "What is it?" Beatrice whispered. She laid one paw on his shoulder. "I'd know that sound anywhere," Arthur said in a low voice. "I last heard it the day the humans destroyed the nest under the rosebush at Mr. Fitzgibbon's farm." He breathed deeply, struggling to control his fear. "It's a bulldozer," he said, shivering. Later that afternoon, the rats climbed a rock pinnacle to the highest point of the cliff. From there, the scene spread before them like a vast mural. A rock platform covered with men and machines, the river with a with a massive barrier stretching halfway across it, and a rope bridge connected to the cliffs on the other side, a road running over the mountain down to the edge of the river itself. "What are they building?" Max asked out loud. No one answered. "We should rest," Arthur said. "When it's dark, we'll go down and investigate." It was Beatrice who made the discovery that revealed the secret. The moon was almost full, and the rats could see everything, but still they did not understand. There were the enormous machines, cranes, trucks, bulldozers. They found blasting powder stored in a small tin-roofed shed. They walked along the concrete wall that channeled most of the river into a narrow passage. Here, to be sure, was the cause of the flooding. Yet for what? Beatrice slipped away from the group to explore on her own. She discovered an aluminum trailer beside the dirt road that ran up to the mountain pass. It had a door, but this was locked, or at least Beatrice could not open it with her mouth or paws. But one of the windows was slightly ajar. Beatrice wedged her small body into the crack and pushed. She fell, but the fall was broken immediately by the paper-strewn surface of a large desk. It was dark inside the trailer, but Beatrice had good eyes. A thin booklet caught a ray of moonlight from the window, so that its title was illuminated. "Business Plan for the Thorn Valley Dam and Recreation Center."
Oh no!
She read only a few pages before she decided she must fetch Arthur and the others. The small band was just leaving the pontoon bridge. Beatrice walked the last few paces toward them through the darkness with her head down. "We were worried," Arthur scolded, but seeing her expression, he asked quickly, "What have you found?" "They plan to flood the valley," she said quietly. There was a moment of silence. Arthur broke it, looking back toward the cement walkway and the rope bridge. Dam?" he asked in disbelief. She nodded. "Why would they want to build a dam in the middle of the forest?" "Their plans are in the trailer. I'll show you." They followed behind Beatrice, slowly, still taking in the news. Timothy stumbled, and an ache started in his side. He had not realized how tired he felt. Beside him, Max spoke through clenched teeth. "We won't let them do it," he whispered fiercely. "We just won't." Racso at work. During the days and nights that Timothy was away, Racso was lonely. He felt ashamed that he had lied about his family. He thought about his mother, who went out each night to fetch leftovers from the farmer's market a few blocks away. She always tried to bring back something she thought Racso would particularly like: a few sweet cherries, a raisin, once even the discarded end of a roll of lifesavers with 2 candies still in it. While she was out, Jenner was nervous. He paced back and forth inside the nest. He was afraid for her, as he was for all of them, afraid that she might be captured, as he had been years before, afraid that one of the pieces of food she picked up would be bait in a rat trap. He was relieved when she got home. Later in the night, when Racso wanted to go out exploring or to meet friends, Jenner argued. Racso got so sick of the arguments that he often sneaked out without his father's knowing it. One night, he waited until he heard Jenner go to bed, then tiptoed out the door to meet his friends at a dance at the recreation center. The human kids had turned the music up full blast and had flashing lights up on the stage. Racso and the other rats danced in their hiding places behind the baseboard. They shook their shoulders and tails and sang along with the records. Racso was having so much fun that he didn't even think about the time. Then suddenly the record player went off. Racso peeked out. The last teenagers were leaving, and behind them the janitor. The lock turned in the door. Racso knew he was in big trouble. The rec center didn't reopen until 9 in the morning, and there were no escape routes. When he got home, Jenner was waiting for him. Racso thought he would be spanked, or at least grounded, but Jenner was too upset to get mad. "I thought they had caught you." His voice broke. "I thought we'd never see you again." For once, Racso told the truth about what had happened. He promised himself he would never sneak out again. For a while he didn't, but then he felt as if he were missing all the fun, so he changed his mind about the promise. Still, it made Racso feel good, knowing that his father cared so much about him. At Thorn Valley, there was no one to ask whether he had eaten all his breakfast, or to tell him to be careful, or to make sure that he went to bed on time. He missed his family. He missed Timothy, too. He was not sure how he had grown so fond of the little mouse. True, Timothy had saved his life, but that act of courage was not the foundation of their friendship. In fact, Racso felt embarrassed that he had got himself into a situation where he had to be saved at all. Later, when the owl attacked, Timothy had again risked his life for Racso, and yet the times when Racso had felt closest to Timothy began with the days and nights when he had cared for Timothy, fed him, told him stories, pulled him in the sling. He had learned then that he, Racso, could help someone. Since some of the workers were away on the expedition, Nicodemus asked for volunteers to fill in for them. Racso asked to work in the garden and was assigned to the job with Christopher under the supervision of an older rat, Bertha. "I've heard she's mean," Christopher whispered. "Who told you that?" Christopher grinned. "My cousin. One day she stepped on a pea plant when she was playing tag and Bertha yelled at her. She thinks vegetables are beautiful and children are a nuisance." Racso was intrigued. In class, Christopher was quiet, almost shy. His color was so light that Hermione claimed he blended in with the whitewashed walls so that she didn't notice him. And when she did call on him, he was tongue-tied. But he wasn't tongue-tied now. Bertha met them by the compost pile on Tuesday afternoon. She had made a list of tasks, neatly printed on a sheet of birch bark paper, which she handed to Racso. She lectured them on the proper use of garden tools, on the benefits of mulch and compost, and on the life stages of the bean beetle. Racso fidgeted. Christopher kept his eyes on the ground and didn't move. The lecture ended. "I will meet you back here at 4 o'clock sharp, she said. I expect each task on the list to be performed thoroughly and well. The two of you will be working in square 2B, and she pointed to a small plot behind the blackberry bushes. Racso cleared his throat. He wanted to tell her that he couldn't read the list, that he was still learning to read, but he was afraid that she would be scornful. He handed the paper to Christopher, who studied it long and hard. Bertha eyed them sharply. If there are no more questions, I'll be on my way, she said, and she walked away briskly. But we never even asked the first questions, Racso said. Christopher shrugged. They walked to the garden without looking at each other. Racso saw that it was filled with green leafy plants about 6 inches tall. What are they? Cabbages? Christopher suggested. Racso groaned. Even I know better than that. Cabbages are round. Christopher scratched behind his ear. Whatever they are, we have to do the things on the list to them. Racso didn't want to admit that he couldn't read the list, so he asked Christopher. Which of the things on the list shall we do first? Christopher looked irritated. The first one, of course. He unfolded the paper and held it out to Racso. Here. Racso drew back his paws as if the paper were a hot potato, but Christopher thrust it right under his nose. Racso studied the series of letters without recognizing a single word. He did recognize the letters, and he tried to sound them out in his mind, as Hermione had shown him. But even then he couldn't figure out one word. Well, Christopher said, hurry up, what does it say? Racso tried to imagine what it might say so that he could tell Christopher. Then he thought about Christopher's question. Suddenly he remembered being assigned to study the alphabet with Christopher. Could it be that Christopher couldn't read the list either? The thought struck him as funny, and he chuckled. What's so funny? You, that's what. Christopher grinned. I may be funny, but nobody's going to be laughing long if we don't get started on this work. Now, what are we supposed to do first? How would I know? Racso said lightly. I can't read. But I can't read either. I know, Racso said. They looked at each other and started to laugh. They laughed harder and harder. Finally, Racso laughed so hard that he fell down. Christopher fell down beside him. They rolled over and over on the soft green plants. Each time they looked at each other, they laughed harder. Suddenly, Christopher stopped laughing. He sat up, and then he stood up. Where he had rolled, the leafy green plants lay crushed against the ground. Racso stood up too. They looked at the garden and then at each other. It's ruined, Christopher said. Racso couldn't think of what to say. He imagined Bertha returning to the garden to find the plants smashed. Quickly, he made a decision. We'll have to pick them. Christopher nodded. They began to work, picking both the leaves and stems of the crushed plants and laying them in a neat pile. The plants gave off a pleasant smell that reminded Racso of something he couldn't quite picture. He ate a leaf, then another. The taste was sharp and slightly sweet. All at once, he realized what it was. Peppermint! Christopher smiled. Of course. We used to make mint tea during the cold weather. Tea! Racso scoffed. In the city, we eat it in candy. Haven't you heard of peppermint patties? No, Christopher said. Racso held his paw out to one side as if he were making a speech. He sang the peppermint patty jingle. Sweet and gooey, put it in your mouth. He danced a little dance step, as they did when they sang it on television. Christopher watched wide-eyed. I've never tasted candy, he said, but I've heard that it isn't good for you. That's ridiculous. I used to eat it all the time, and look at me. Christopher hesitated. You are a little short for your age.
That's because I could never get enough of it. No, believe me, Christopher, if there's one thing that Thorn Valley needs, it's candy. Maybe we could use this mint to make some, Christopher said. There's a cookbook in the kitchen. Isabella works there. She could look up the recipe and read it to us. Wonderful.
It occurred to Racso that Christopher was really extremely bright. When they had made and served the candy, and he, Racso, was recognized as the one who had brought it to Thorn Valley, he would be sure to let Christopher share in the limelight. After all, Christopher had been present when the idea was first conceived. Racso couldn't wait to get started. The two rats picked mint for more than an hour. They picked all the plants that had been crushed, and then they picked most of the plants that were still standing. They made two big piles of leaves. After a while, the piles were so big that they had to stand up on their hind legs to add more.
Oh my God.
Finally, all the mint had been picked. Racso looked at the bare ground with satisfaction. He thought about how thrilled the rats would be when they tasted candy for the first time. He decided that it should be a surprise. He would keep them in suspense until it was actually ready. Then he would call to them.
There's a treat for you in the meeting room.
When they tasted it, they would just go crazy. Racso felt tired. They had been working for a long time. Christopher looked weary too.
Let's lie down and rest for 5 minutes.
Christopher nodded. They curled up together beside the piles of mint. It smelled lovely. The sun had been shining and the ground was comfortably warm. Racso felt very relaxed. He felt his eyes closing. He dreamed about chocolate mints on a wooden platter. He offered a piece to Isabella, who tasted it and smiled at him. She came close to him to give him a kiss. He leaned forward, but someone shrieked right in his ear. Ah! Racso's eyes flew open, and he leaped to his feet. Christopher stood beside him. Mint leaves were flying into the air, as if someone were trying to knock the pile down from the other side. There was another scream. Christopher and Racso ran around the pile and saw Bertha standing there. When she saw them, she screamed again.
You ruined it!
She pointed at them with one paw. You! Rats came running from every direction. Mitchell, the head gardener, hurried up. He looked surprised when he saw the piles of mint and the bare ground where the mint used to be.
What happened here?
He asked. Racso remembered the list. He felt nervous. He wanted to say something, but no words came to mind. They ruined it, Bertha said in a whisper. Her eyes rolled back in her head as if she were in shock. There was a long silence. Racso felt that all eyes were on him. He saw Christopher looking down at his feet. He cleared his throat. But before he could speak, Bertha began to shout. I gave them explicit instructions. I wrote it down. Mitchell looked at Racso and Christopher. Racso fidgeted. He looked hard at his tail, as if it held new interest for him. Finally, he spoke, so softly that he could hardly hear his own voice. We can't read, he said. Mitchell looked as if he wanted to smile. He scratched his head with his hind leg. Then he gestured to the piles of mint.
Do you have plans for this?
Racso could tell that Christopher was too scared to say anything, so he forced himself to speak up.
Yes,
he said.
We want to make a wonderful surprise. It will be something new, and I'm sure you'll all like it a lot.
There was a slight stir among the rats. Someone muttered, a surprise, and another rat responded, I like surprises. Mitchell looked amused. I'm going to tell Nicodemus, Bertha whined. I'm going to tell him that they ruined my mint patch. Our mint patch, Mitchell said, firmly but kindly.
And if it hadn't been picked soon, The cold would have destroyed it anyway.
Bertha snapped her tail against the ground, but she did not say anything. She went and sat by herself behind the blackberry bush. The remaining rats crowded closer to Racso and Christopher.
When do we get the surprise? What color is it? Is it bigger than a cabbage? Is it smaller than a peanut?
Racso smiled. He refused to answer their questions, but when he looked toward the blackberry bush and saw Bertha's lonely silhouette, he felt a little sad, and he resolved to give her the biggest piece of candy.